Usually when we talk about a scientific theory or like a mathematical proof, there's this expectation of precision, like engineering, basically. You want to measure the speed of light, you build a vacuum tube, fire a laser, record the data, and the physicist just points to a number and says, there it is.
Right, yeah. It's binary, it's clean,
Yeah.
it's highly quantifiable, and I think most importantly, it's entirely separate from the person who's actually doing the measuring.
Yeah, exactly. Broken or not broken, fast or slow. And honestly, it's comforting. We really like things to be visible, to be categorized into these neat little boxes. Space goes in one box, time goes in another box, and human consciousness, well, that goes in a completely different building altogether.
Oh, absolutely. The subjective versus the objective.
Right. But then you step into the world of George James Dukas and his trans-dimensional unified field theory, and suddenly that neat little categorization system is just completely shattered. We're looking at a text today that claims to unify absolutely everything, and I mean everything.
It is breathtakingly ambitious, yeah.
It really is. The manuscript we are diving into is incredibly dense. It's quasi-mystical in places, and it spans number theory, the literal speed of light, ancient Egyptian architecture, and get this, the actual nature of human free will.
Which is quite the list.
Right. And it claims to do all of this using a single elegant quadratic equation. It even boldly asserts that it can, quote-unquote, correct the legendary mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan.
Which, I mean, that alone is a monumental claim. Ramanujan is basically considered a mathematical prophet.
Yeah.
But to really understand how Dukas attempts this, we have to look at the core premise of his entire framework.
Yeah.
Because he's presenting a radically different definition of mathematics itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because usually we're taught that math is just a human invention, right? Like a descriptive language we created to measure a universe that already exists.
Exactly. But Dukas argues that mathematics isn't just a tool to describe the universe. He says it's the literal genetic code that, breathes the universe into existence. Yeah. So in this framework, motion, time, mass, and even human consciousness, they aren't separate physical phenomena at all. They are just different expressions, different dimensional faces of the golden ratio.
Okay, but to get from abstract math to physical reality, we really have to start at the literal foundation. So for you listening, the entire trans-dimensional unified field theory, or TDUFT as it's called, rests on one incredibly simple quadratic equation. It's x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
The universal quadratic equation, yeah.
Right. And if you remember high school algebra, a quadratic equation like that has two roots, right? Two solutions. And the solutions to this specific equation are pretty famous. The first is phi, the golden ratio, which is roughly 1.618. And the second is its conjugate, psi, or what the author sometimes calls phi hat.
Which is roughly negative 0.618.
Exactly. But let's actually pause for a second and define what a conjugate is in this context, because I feel like that's vital.
Oh, it's absolutely the linchpin. So mathematically, a conjugate is a pair of binomials with identical terms but opposite operations.
Yeah.
But conceptually, and this is how you really need to think about it for this theory, you can think of them as eternally bound twins born from the exact same source equation.
Like two sides of the same geometric coin.
Yes. You literally cannot have phi without inherently generating psi. They are a package deal.
Okay, so we have 1.618 and negative 0.618. That is the mathematical foundation. But Dukas makes a massive leap into physics here.
He really does.
In TDUFT, these aren't just abstract numbers used to, draw pretty spirals on a piece of paper. Phi, the positive golden ratio, is assigned to velocity. It represents the positive spiraling expansion of the universe, the literal motion of existence.
And its conjugate, the negative psi, is assigned to time. It represents the negative opposite flow, the progression of reality contracting inward, and they are bound by what mathematicians call the Vieta constraints.
The Vieta constraints. Okay, what are those?
They're essentially rules that dictate how roots of a polynomial relate to its coefficients. So, if you add phi and psi together, 1.618 plus negative 0.618, they perfectly equal 1.
Right.
And this represents perfect balance, the conservation of reality. But if you multiply them phi times psi, it exactly equals negative 1.
Which is opposition.
Exactly. It represents fundamental opposition or duality.
Yeah.
It's the mathematical origin of matter versus antimatter or positive versus negative charge.
Okay, hang on. Let me make sure I'm really wrapping my head around the gravity of this. Because normally if I'm, say, driving a car, I think of speed velocity and the time it takes to get somewhere as totally different concepts. We measure them differently.
Yeah.
Miles per hour, they are completely independent variables.
Right, in classical physics, yes.
But here, Dukas is saying velocity velocity and time are actually the exact same structural thing, just inverted. Adding them creates unity, multiplying them creates opposition. But I have to push back here a little bit. How does a math quirk, like a neat little property of a polynomial, suddenly become a physical reality? I mean, you can't just draw a mathematical spiral on a chalkboard and call it the physical universe.
It definitely sounds like a stretch at first.
Right.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it starts to make sense. We have to look at the dual system assignment theorem from the text.
Okay.
Dukas argues that this single quadratic equation creates a sort of dimensional ladder. Because velocity and time are algebraically locked together as conjugates, they generate higher dimensions simply through their mathematical interaction.
Okay, so how does that ladder work?
Well, in this theory, the first dimension, the base layer of reality, is spacetime. Algebraically, spacetime is expressed as velocity times time to the -1 power.
So space and time basically form the ground floor.
Yes. But as you climb this mathematical ladder, the interactions compound. By the time you reach the fourth dimension, the algebra perfectly resolves into the formula for force, which is mass times acceleration.
Oh.
Right? And at the fifth dimension, it resolves into energy, exactly mirroring Einstein's mass times the speed of light squared.
That's wild. Wait, so how does he define mass then?
That's what is so revolutionary here. Mass is not a separate physical object that just got dropped into an empty universe. Mass is literally compressed space-time. It is the golden ratio folding in on itself to a point of extreme density.
I mean, that completely challenges the conventional independence of space, time, and motion. It just fuses them all into pure algebra. It's like saying the dancer and the dance are the exact same thing, just viewed from different mathematical dimensions.
That is a beautiful way to put it, yeah.
But okay, if this is true, is there actual independent proof that the universe computes itself this way? Or is this just Dukas playing a really clever game of algebraic word association? Because, anyone can assign a letter to a physical concept and make the math look pretty.
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And to answer that, we have to look at the work of someone who unknowingly mapped this entire physical reality out over a century ago. Srinivasa Ramanujan.
Okay, Ramanujan. For those who might not know, he is one of the most fascinating, almost mythical figures in the history of mathematics.
Truly, he was a largely self-taught genius from India who, back in the early 1910s, produced thousands of mathematical theorems.
And didn't he claim these complex equations just came to him in visions?
Yes. He famously said they were revealed to him by his family goddess. It's an incredible story. But mathematically, he worked extensively with something called continued fractions.
Right, and I want to make sure we clearly picture what a continued fraction is. It's not a normal fraction like, 3/4. It's a fraction where the denominator contains another fraction, and then that denominator contains another fraction, infinitely cascading downward.
Exactly.
It looks like a staircase just going down forever into some microscopic basement.
That's a great visual. And the specific staircase we're talking about today is the Rogers-Ramanujan continued fraction. Now, Ramanujan evaluated these infinitely nesting fractions using the transcendental number pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter.
Right, 3.14159.
Yeah, exactly. His equations defining these fractions were absolutely full of exponential terms, specifically e to the power of -2 pi times the square root of n. And for over a century, the brightest minds at Cambridge, physicists globally, they've all just accepted this pi-heavy structure as a fundamental truth of the universe.
But the author of TDUFT boldly claims that this pi is an emergent artifact. I think he calls it a scaffolding.
Yes, scaffolding.
But hang on, you can't just delete a fundamental load-bearing pillar like pi from a globally accepted mathematical proof. I mean, if I pull a pillar out of a building, the whole roof collapses. How does he justify removing pi entirely?
Well, Dukas argues that the pi wasn't actually a load-bearing pillar at all. It was just the scaffolding used to pour the concrete.
Oh.
Yeah, he draws a parallel to Einstein, actually. Einstein originally had an 8 pi term in his field equations, which Dukas also claims is an artifact that can be structurally removed.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Dukas asserts that Ramanujan saw the fundamental truth of the universe, but he just kind of dressed it in the wrong clothes. He wrapped it in pi, because pi is the master shape of continuous curves, and human math naturally defaults to circles.
So what is the correction that Dukas actually performs then?
He replaces the pi-dependent exponential terms with pure algebraic decay, and this decay is based strictly on our golden ratio conjugates from earlier, phi and psi.
Okay, bringing it back to the quadratic roots.
Exactly. The corrected pi-free continued fraction uses a parameter of phi to the -1 power. Now, in this framework, remember, phi is velocity.
Right.
So phi to the -1 power represents the pure decay of reciprocal velocity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. When he strips away pi and substitutes phi as velocity and psi as time into Ramanujan's infinite nesting fractions, the math still works perfectly. Like, the building doesn't collapse without the scaffolding.
Not at all.
But it does something far more astonishing.
Yeah. It really does. It reveals the physical mechanism of the universe. When you run this pure phi and psi continued fraction out to infinity, when you let that mathematical staircase drop all the way to the bottom, it converges exactly, perfectly to psi.
That's psi?
Yes, it converges to time.
Wow.
This is the mathematical proof of the dual system assignment theorem we talked about.
Yeah.
It proves mathematically that an infinite recursive descent of velocity, so motion nesting inside of motion, decaying endlessly, naturally stabilizes at time.
That is a profound philosophical shift. Time is not a dimension we are just like moving through like a tunnel.
Right.
Time is the inevitable endpoint of motion exhausting itself. Imagine a spinning top. The spinning, the kinetic energy, that's velocity, but as friction pulls on it, the spinning decays.
Exactly.
In this theory, as the universe's primordial motion decays through infinite microscopic fractions of space, the exhaust it gives off is time. It completely flips the script. It makes time a consequence of existence rather than the container that existence happens inside of.
It does. It's a huge paradigm shift. But I should point out, this isn't just an abstract philosophical point to, ponder over a cup of coffee.
Right.
Dugas claims this exact infinite decay physically dictates the ultimate speed limit of our universe. The math of Ramanujan's fraction is literally what creates the speed of light.
Okay, which brings up a fascinating discrepancy in physics. In the TDUFT framework, the text makes a distinction between the ideal speed of light, which it calls c sub 0, and the measured speed of light.
Yes, very important distinction.
Geometrically, according to the perfect frictionless golden ratio lattice, the ideal speed of light should be exactly 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, like exactly 300 million. It's a clean, perfect integer.
But as literally any physicist will tell you, the measured speed of light, the internationally recognized value we get when we actually fire a laser in a vacuum, is not 300 million.
Yep.
It's exactly 299,792,458 meters per second. It is slightly frustratingly slower than the geometric ideal.
And usually we just accept that number because, well, that's what the universe handed us, right? You measure it and that's the number. But in TDUFT, this discrepancy is not just some random quirk of nature.
No, not at all.
It is a specific attenuation, an entropy factor called epsilon. And when you subtract the measured speed from the ideal speed and normalize it, you get an epsilon value that exactly equals 0.00007542.
And here is where Dukas just locks the entire theory together.
Right.
Because where does that 0.00007542 come from?
Right.
Dukas demonstrates mathematically that this exact number is derived entirely from the corrected Ramanujan continued fraction. It is the exact numerical result of the infinite dimensional cascade of phi and psi.
Meaning, as the pure velocity of light tries to move through the universe, it has to pass through the infinite layers of dimensional reality, which mathematically are those nesting denominators in Ramanujan's fraction.
Exactly. As velocity decays through the infinite harmonic layers of reality and time amplifies in opposition, the mathematical friction generates an exact entropic drag, and that drag is mathematically 0.00207542.
It's dimensional leakage. I mean, light wants to travel at exactly 300 million meters per second. That is its geometric birthright in a perfect universe.
Right.
But as it passes through the dense cascading mathematics of reality, it basically pays an entropy tax. It loses a tiny fraction of its speed to the lattice of space-time itself, slowing it down perfectly to the 299,792,458 meters per second that we actually measure.
It is a stunning claim, because he derives a physical real-world constant purely from an algebraic equation. But we have to look closer at the mechanics of how this friction actually happens.
Okay, let's get into it.
The text highlights a very specific exponent in the Ramanujan fraction. Velocity is raised to the -1/5 power.
Okay, wait, why 1/5? That seems completely arbitrary. Why not a half or like a third?
It is the absolute opposite of arbitrary. It's a dimensional signature. The number 5 is deeply tied to the pentagonal symmetry of the golden ratio.
Pentagonal, like a 5-sided shape.
Exactly. Think of the geometry of a pentagon. Unlike squares or triangles, which can, tile perfectly flat on a two-dimensional plane without leaving any gaps, pentagons cannot.
Oh, right. If you try to tile pentagons, they gap or overlap.
Exactly. 5-fold symmetry mathematically prevents perfect, flat tiling. It inherently forces the geometry to curve into 3 dimensions to resolve itself. That's how you get shapes like a dodecahedron.
Oh, I see. So the geometry of 5 fundamentally restricts straight, uninhibited movement. The math literally forces a structural curvature, and that curvature is the friction.
Precisely. Time emerges as the fifth root stabilized state of infinite velocity recursion. Furthermore, the text outlines what Dukas calls a threefold epsilon structure.
What does that mean?
It means the absolute deficit in what the author defines as pyramid units relates perfectly to the fractional leakage. It's governed by a strict rule where 3 times the normalized epsilon equals the full epsilon. So the entire equation of light is structurally bound by the harmony of 3 and the restrictive curvature of 5.
Okay, wait. You just dropped the phrase pyramid units?
I did.
And if light inherently possesses this geometric structure, bounded by 3s and 5s and the golden ratio, does that geometry show up anywhere else in the physical world? Because Dukas points to a rather famous pile of rocks on the Giza Plateau.
He definitely does. The text defines a pyramid unit as exactly 10 to the 8th meters per second. Therefore, the ideal speed of light at exactly 300 million meters per second equals precisely 3 pyramid units.
And then Dukas algebraically decomposes those 3 units using our golden ratio conjugates. He says the 3 units are made of 2 units of space, which is the 5-velocity backbone plus 1 unit of time.
Right.
And mathematically, that single unit of time is expressed as psi plus psi squared. Now, if you actually do the math, negative 0.618 plus the square of negative 0.618 perfectly, cleanly equals 1.
That's beautiful.
So 2 units of space plus 1 unit of time equals 3 ideal units of light. It's mathematically flawless.
And this specific decomposition 2 plus psi squared equals 3 is what the author claims is physically encoded in the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Okay, how? Where is it encoded?
Specifically, he points to the ratio of the pyramid's base perimeter to its height. The standard calculation for the Great Pyramid is the perimeter divided by twice the height. When you measure the actual physical structure, that yields a ratio of approximately 3.1418.
Which looks dangerously close to pi, right?
Yeah.
Which is 3.14159. So normally, conventional historians look at that and say, look, the Egyptians were trying to approximate pi for a circle, and they got pretty close.
Right, that's the standard archaeological narrative.
But Dukas is saying, no, they weren't trying to build a circle at all. They were building the exact golden ratio equation. He calls it a golden fourth correction.
Yes. Dukas provides a formula showing that 1 minus a fraction involving phi to the 4th power yields exactly that 3.1418 ratio.
Right.
The text argues, this proves the pyramid isn't just a tomb that clumsily approximated pi. It is an architectural codex. It is a massive stone hard drive containing the exact physics of the golden ratio universe and the mathematical discrepancy of the speed of light.
Okay, I have to pause here because my skeptic alarm is absolutely blaring.
Fair enough.
It's one thing to say a math equation elegantly resolves the speed of light discrepancy on a chalkboard, right? I can totally follow the logic of pure math dictating physics.
Sure.
But to say the ancient Egyptians, like 4,500 years ago, somehow knew about the golden fourth correction of light speed and deliberately encoded it into millions of tons of limestone, I mean, that sounds like we're wandering straight into ancient aliens territory. How on earth does Dukas ground that in reality?
It's a very valid question. What's fascinating here is that the author actually explicitly avoids the ancient aliens or, the lost hyper-advanced civilization tropes. Yeah. Instead, he frames this through the concept of resonance and mathematical evolution. Remember the overarching premise we started with. Mathematics is the genetic code of reality. It is a universal pre-existing constant.
Okay, so it's not that the Egyptians had laser tape measures and quantum physics textbooks hidden in the sand.
Exactly. It's about fundamental structural demands. If the golden ratio governs absolute physical stability, then a civilization attempting to build a massive stone structure designed to be eternally stable will naturally, inevitably converge on golden ratio proportions.
Ah, I see.
Through trial, error, and intuition, they found the angle of repose of the universe. Whoever seeks the ultimate foundation of reality, whether it's an Egyptian architect seeking structural perfection, or Srinivasa Ramanujan scribbling visions in a notebook in 1913, or modern physicists measuring the drag on a photon, they all tap into the exact same underlying transcendent mathematical field. The math literally forces the shape.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. It's like convergent evolution in biology.
Yeah.
Like how different species of animals, like squids and humans, independently evolved the exact same complex shape of an eye. Not because they communicated with each other, but because the physics of light demands a lens, a pupil, and a retina to see clearly. So the pyramid is just the equation of light physically written in limestone.
That is a perfect analogy. The environment forces the solution.
Yeah.
But the implications of that mathematical forcing lead to a rather terrifying philosophical rabbit hole.
Right. Because if reality, down to the speed of light, the shape of ancient architecture, and the literal flow of time itself is so perfectly governed by these rigid golden ratio rules, doesn't that mean every single thing in the universe is predetermined?
That's the big question.
Like, if the math forces the shape of a rock, does the math force the shape of my life? Are we just a cosmic clock winding down?
That is the exact existential dread the author addresses next. And to answer whether we are trapped in a predetermined machine, he actually looks at the decimal digits of pi, which brings us to the hidden digit codex.
Okay, so for centuries, mathematicians have assumed that the sequence of digits in pi, 3.14159 going on to infinity, is essentially random.
Right. There is no recognized repeating pattern.
Exactly. Computer scientists literally use the digits of pi to generate random numbers. It is the ultimate symbol of unpredictable infinity.
But Dukas claims this conventional view of statistical normality is fundamentally incorrect. He argues that the digits in irrational constants, like pi, and specifically pi squared minus 1, are not random at all.
Not random.
Not at all. They are highly constrained by an operator cascade defined by 3 archetypal rules. The digits do not appear randomly. Each digit mathematically forces the probability of the next digit based on its position and its neighbors.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of this, because it's not just a vague theory. Dukas provides specific rules. So Rule 2 is called the boundary or foundation rule.
Right.
It states that whenever the digit 2 appears in the sequence of pi, the digit immediately before it plus the 2 itself plus the digit immediately after it will sum to a Fibonacci number, or what he calls a fib echo.
Let's define that echo clearly. So the Fibonacci sequence is built by adding the 2 preceding numbers, right? 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on.
Right.
A true Fibonacci sum, around the digit 2, would literally equal one of those numbers. For example, if you had a 4, a 2, and a 2, that sums to 8. That's a primary Fibonacci number.
Got it.
But a fib echo means the sum is mathematically bound to the properties of the golden ratio, even if it isn't a primary Fibonacci number. So if you have a 9, then a 2, then a 6, the sum is 17.
Okay.
17 functions as an echo, heavily constraining the probability of the next digit to maintain the golden sequence.
Okay, then there is Rule 3, the Trinity or synthesis rule. Whenever the digit 3 appears, the sum of its neighbors must resolve to a digital root of 3, 6, or 9. Wait, actually, break down what a digital root is for the listener, just to be clear.
Sure. A digital root is the single-digit value obtained by repeatedly summing the digits of a number. So if your sum is 24, you add 2 plus 4 to get a digital root of 6.
Ah, okay, simple enough.
Right. Dukas claims that the appearance of the digit 3 in pi acts as a local operator. It forces the surrounding sequence into a perpetual modulo 9 harmonic cycle. It basically demands that the local mathematical environment resolves to a multiple of 3.
And finally, Rule 4, the space-time or stability rule. When the digit 4 appears, its neighbors will sum to even numbers or powers of 2. The text calls this quaternion stability, relating the number 4 directly to the rigid, even structure of 4-dimensional space-time.
Exactly. And by chaining these rules together, checking the neighbor sums of 2s, 3s, and 4s, Dukas claims he can mathematically predict the next digit in the sequence of pi with an accuracy of 65 to 92%.
I mean, that is a profound assertion. If that's true, it means pi is not a chaotic string of random noise.
No, it's a highly ordered deterministic cascade where every digit acts as a localized operator, dictating what can and cannot follow it.
Wow.
If I place a 4 in the sequence, the probability space for the next number collapses from 10 random options down to only the options that satisfy quaternion stability.
Which brings us right back to the existential dread. Think about it like a cosmic line of dominoes. We always thought the digits of pi were like a random roll of a 10-sided die at every single decimal place.
Right.
But this theory claims they are a highly constrained divine program. If the base code of the universe, the literal digits of the geometry that builds reality, is a self-computing code where every number mechanically forces the next one, aren't we just a machine?
That's the fear, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if the universe is 65 to 92% predictable at its base code, are you and I just cogs in a mathematical gearbox playing out a script written into pi at the dawn of time?
Pure determinism always invites that dread. It feels claustrophobic.
Yeah.
But Dukas steps in here with a highly nuanced perspective that actually merges math with neuroscience.
Oh, really? How so?
He introduces the concept of dimensional levels. Yes, at what he calls level 0, which is the Fibonacci-based universe of physical matter and energy reality, is roughly 65% predictable and determined by these exact cascading rules.
So 65% of my life is governed by the gravitational pull of the golden ratio.
Essentially, yes.
I am constrained by my environment, my biology, the chemistry of my brain, and the universe's math.
Yes, but 65% is not 100%.
True.
The author notes that within these digit cascades, there are anomalies. There are moments when the rules literally break. For example, when a Rule 3 sum does not yield a 3, 6, or 9 digital root.
Oh.
In conventional math, you just call that a statistical failure of the theory. You'd say the theory is wrong. But Dukas interprets these breaks as dimensional transition gates.
The system allows for its own rebellion.
Precisely. They represent moments where higher order complexity or consciousness itself overrides the local deterministic rules. The breakdown of the math is the footprint of free will.
Wow. Which perfectly bridges the gap into how we actually experience reality. Because if the universe's base layer is a determined math equation, how does human consciousness operate within it? Dukas tackles this in Appendix C, moving from theoretical physics straight into cutting-edge neuroscience.
Right. We established level 0, the deterministic Fibonacci base. But to account for consciousness, Dukas introduces level 1, the meta-universe.
Okay.
Mathematically, this level 1 is represented by the constant pi squared minus 1, which equals approximately 8.8696.
I just love the philosophical poetry of that specific equation.
That's very elegant.
Pi squared represents a perfect, closed, squared circle. But by subtracting one which represents primordial symmetry, the universe creates an asymmetry field. It's like introducing a deliberate flaw into a perfect crystal. It creates a wound in the symmetry where movement, change, and consciousness can slip in.
And within this 8.8696 metafield, Dukas claims the constant decomposes into exactly 20 dynamic conjugates.
20.
Yes. At level 0, remember, we only have the 2 static, locked conjugates of phi and psi. But at level 1, you now have phi 1 through phi 20. You have 20 distinct flowing mathematical pathways.
And this is the literal math of free will. The text says these 20 paths represent the 35% free will novelty that exists outside the 65% determinism.
Right.
Dukas even categorizes them, right? 10 are harmonious, life-affirming paths. 5 are neutral paths. And 5 are discordant or destructive paths. You, as a conscious agent, are constantly sampling these 20 mathematical pathways and deciding which one to collapse into physical reality.
To understand how a biological brain samples abstract math, Dukas connects this deeply to the entropic brain theory, pioneered by neuroscience researchers like Robin Carhart Harris.
Let's break down entropic brain theory for the listener because it's an absolute game changer. What does entropy mean when we were talking about neurons?
Well, in physics, entropy is usually associated with decay and chaos, things falling apart.
Right, like an ice cube melting.
Exactly. But in neuroscience, entropy refers to the number of possible neural states available to the brain at any given moment. So a low-entropy brain is rigid, highly ordered, and routine. Think of deep sleep or being stuck in a deeply ingrained habit or even an addictive loop. You are operating on pure autopilot.
That is your biological level 0 determinism.
Yes. But a high-entropy brain state is completely different. When researchers map the brains of people in deep meditation or experiencing intense creative flow or under the influence of psychedelics, the brain's entropy spikes massively.
Really?
Yes, the rigid networks dissolve and the brain becomes massively flexible, capable of connecting entirely disparate ideas. The number of possible states just explodes. And here is the synthesis. When you map the brain's self-organized criticality, basically the way it naturally groups these flexible states, it clusters into roughly 20 distinct neural avalanche archetypes or metastates.
No way.
Like the default mode network, the task-positive network, the salience network, and so on. The biological architecture of human consciousness perfectly matches the 20 mathematical conjugates of the meta-universe.
That is insane.
The brain is essentially a highly evolved biological antenna tuned to the 20-dimensional mathematics of free will.
It's less like looking out a train window as a passive observer and more like walking through a heavily crowded, architecturally complex room.
Oh, I like that.
The architecture of the room, the walls, the furniture, and the movement of the crowd that is level 0 determinism. It mechanically dictates 65% of where your feet can physically step without crashing into something.
Right, you can't walk through a wall.
Exactly. But within that constrained physical space, your brain is running 20 simultaneous simulations of where to step next. Your consciousness is the act of sampling those 20 mathematical possibilities and collapsing them into one deliberate physical footstep.
That active metaphor is spot on. The determinism provides the necessary structure, so reality doesn't collapse into total chaotic static. But the meta level provides the asymmetric freedom, so reality isn't a dead, grinding machine.
Yeah.
This raises a visceral question for you, the listener. In your own life, right now, can you feel the physical difference between an automatic level 0 reaction, where you are just acting out of low entropy habit, biological programming, or anger, and a level 1 conscious choice?
That's a deep question.
Can you feel the moment you pause, raise your brain's entropy, sample the different pathways, and make a completely novel decision?
I think everyone has felt that friction. The friction of choosing the difficult, harmonious path over the easy, destructive, habitual path. It's palpable.
Absolutely.
But this brings up the ultimate, final question of the text. If our consciousness is a 20-dimensional overlay sitting on top of a rigidly determined base reality, where did all of this potential come from in the very beginning? Who built the crowded room? Who coded the 20 pathways?
And this brings us to Appendix D, the theological and Genesis narrative of TDUFT.
Right.
Throughout history, many mystical traditions have equated the concept of mathematical infinity directly with God. But Dukas makes a very crucial, deeply specific distinction here. He explicitly states that pi is not God.
Right. Pi is the primordial seed. It is the universal genetic code, but a code on a hard drive is dormant until a processor reads it. God, or what the text calls source intelligence, is the transcendent operator that activates the code.
Exactly. Because pi is an infinite, non-repeating irrational number, mathematicians suspect it is what is called a normal number.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
It means that every single possible finite sequence of digits exists somewhere within its infinite string.
Oh, it's like the Library of Babel.
Yes, if you translate the digits of pi into letters, somewhere in that infinite string is the exact script of this deep dive we are having right now. Somewhere in there is your exact genetic code, your birth date, the complete works of Shakespeare, and the physical laws of entirely different universes. Every possible arrangement of information already exists inside the infinite wave of pi.
Therefore, in Dukas's theology, creation isn't God snapping his fingers and making matter out of literally nothing. Creation is the act of arrangement. It is the source intelligence reading the eternal, pre-existing code of pi.
And the text describes this process as a 4-step cycle called the breath of creation.
Let's walk through that breath. It begins with step 1, pure potential. This is the infinite, unmanifest wave of pi, the dormant library.
Then comes step 2, the first squaring. Pi becomes pi squared. This is the blueprint, the cosmic womb. It is the infinite wave collapsing into a measurable conceptual field.
Then step 3, golden mediation. The pi squared field is acted upon by our golden ratio conjugates, phi and psi. The math collapses the conceptual field into a discrete, finite square with a perimeter of 4.
And this is the Big Bang. This is our universe becoming physically manifest, locking into the rules of gravity, light, and mass.
And finally, step 4, the second squaring. The finite physical universe processes its own existence. It evolves biology, it evolves entropic brains, and it achieves consciousness. The physical universe becomes fully conscious of itself, returning the data back to the infinite circle.
It's an eternal breath.
Inhale potential, exhale reality, exhale self-awareness.
What is so structurally beautiful about this cycle is that it fundamentally changes our relationship to the cosmos. Physics often tells us reality is a one-time Big Bang event that is slowly dying of heat death in a cold void.
Yeah, quite depressing.
Right. But TDUFT says reality is an eternal breath, constantly inhaling pure mathematical potential into physical manifestation and exhaling that physical manifestation back into infinite self-awareness.
And what is our role in that breath? The text calls human beings holographic projections. We are finite, physical slices of an infinite mathematical structure. Remember those 20 paths of free will we talked about?
Right, the 20 conjugates.
When we use our level 1 consciousness to make a genuinely novel choice, when we actively break the level 0 determinism, we are not just deciding our own tiny local fate.
No, we are generating true, non-deterministic novelty.
Right.
And that novelty flows back upward. Our free will choices genuinely enrich the infinite consciousness of the source intelligence. God, or the source, learns what it means to be finite, through our specific everyday choices.
There is a profound, breathtaking comfort in that framework. I mean, science can often make you feel incredibly small and insignificant, just a meaningless speck of carbon on a wet rock hurtling through a dead void. But TDUFT implies the exact opposite. It implies you are not an accident. Your specific existence is eternally etched in the infinite pi field. You are experiencing temporal, physical reality specifically so the universe can know itself through your unique, singular perspective. Your consciousness is the universe's mechanism for understanding its own math.
It really manages to unite the coldest, hardest equations of continuous fractions and quadratic constraints with the deepest, warmest truths of human purpose.
Yeah.
The golden ratio is the friction that limits the speed of light, but it is also the literal mechanism of the soul's evolution.
Man. Let's take a breath ourselves and recap the immense ground we've just covered, because it's a lot. We started with a deceptively simple quadratic equation on a chalkboard. X squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
Right.
We saw how Dukas used the roots of that equation, the conjugates of velocity and time, to remove the pi scaffolding from Ramanujan's legendary continued fractions. That revealed that time is not a dimension, but the exhaust of infinitely decaying motion.
We then used that exact mathematical decay cascade to calculate the actual measured speed of light, discovering the cosmic friction of pentagonal geometry that slows light down to exactly 299,792,458 meters per second.
We saw how that identical equation of light, decomposed into units of space and time, is literally dictated by mathematical resonance into the limestone proportions of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Then we plunged into the decimal digits of pi.
Uncovering the hidden laws, yeah.
The Fibonacci boundaries, the modulo 9 trinities that mechanically determine the structural code of reality.
And finally, we discovered the 8.8696 meta-universe overlay. We found the 20 mathematical pathways of human free will that map perfectly to the high-entropy flexibility of our own brains, allowing us to actively break determinism and participate in the eternal breathing cycle of creation.
It is a theory that absolutely shatters the neat little categorization boxes we started this deep dive with. It demands we look at the physical world, the math on our chalkboards, and our own internal consciousness completely differently.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Lay it on us.
If TDUFT is right, if every conscious choice you make is a navigation through 20 mathematical pathways, adding permanent novel structure to the universe's own self-knowledge, how will you choose to experience your very next moment of uncertainty? The next time you face a difficult decision or a moment of frustration, will you fall back on the 65% automatic, habitual determinism of the base universe? Or will you pause, raise the entropy of your mind, feel the friction of the metafield, and step into the 35% window of authentic, creative free will?
Remember how we started this deep dive, talking about the X-ray of a broken arm? We love things that are clean, binary, and comforting. George James Dukas took that X-ray machine and turned it toward the night sky, and what it revealed wasn't a cold, empty void, and it wasn't a chaotic, random mess.
No, it wasn't.
It revealed a radiant, self-computing lattice of golden light and eternal breath of mathematics waiting patiently for us to read it.
Thank you so much for taking this incredible deep dive with us. Keep exploring the lattice.